The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wider than any human building could ever hope to match. Its walls shimmered with a strange blue light that came from crystals embedded deep within the structure. Ambassador Richard Hayes stood at the human delegation table with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw set tight. He had been standing in this same spot for 3 hours now and his legs ached, but he refused to show any weakness in front of the 12 elder species that sat in their elevated seats looking down at him like gods judging mortals. Lieutenant Commander Karen Webb stood 2 steps behind Richard with her military uniform pressed sharp and her tablet computer held against her chest. She watched the council members with careful eyes and made mental notes of every dismissive gesture and every condescending glance they threw toward the human delegation. Next to her stood Dr. Benjamin Cole, who adjusted his glasses nervously and tried not to think about how his entire scientific career had led him to this moment where he would present humanity's achievements to beings who had mastered space travel before humans had discovered fire. High Chancellor Morvax of the Zytherian Empire raised one of his forearms to silence the chamber. His species looked like giant mantises crossed with something reptilian, and his voice came out in clicks and hisses that the translation devices converted into cold, formal words. He spoke about how the Council had reviewed humanity's petition for full membership and found it premature. The word premature stung, because humans had been seeking this membership for 15 years and had contributed ships and soldiers and scientists to every Council project during that time. Richard had prepared a response, but Morvax continued talking as if the human ambassador had not even opened his mouth. The Zytherian spoke about how humanity was still too young and too violent and too unpredictable to be trusted with the same rights as the elder races. He mentioned the wars that humans had fought among themselves before achieving their unified world government, and he spoke as if those conflicts had happened yesterday, instead of over a century ago. Richard felt his hands ball into fists behind his back, but he kept his face neutral, because losing his temper now would only prove their point about human volatility. Karen leaned forward slightly and whispered that they should present the evidence packet now, before the Council moved to the next agenda item. Richard nodded and cleared his throat loudly enough to cut through Morvax's speech. He requested permission to present humanity's case using the proper formal protocols that the Council demanded. Morvax looked annoyed but granted the permission with a wave of one clawed hand. Dr. Cole stepped forward and activated the holographic display that showed humanity's contributions to galactic society over the past 15 years. The images floated in the air above the chamber floor, showing human-designed improvements to ship engines and human-developed medical treatments that had saved millions of lives across dozens of species and human peacekeepers who had died protecting alien colonies from pirates and raiders. Benjamin spoke clearly about each achievement and provided statistical data that proved human innovation had advanced Council technology by measurable degrees. The Council members barely looked at the presentation. A few of them checked their own devices, and one of the insectoid representatives appeared to be sleeping or whatever passed for sleep in his species. Richard felt his stomach twist with anger, but he maintained his diplomatic composure because that was what Earth needed from him right now. When Benjamin finished his presentation and returned to his spot, the chamber fell silent for exactly 12 seconds before High Chancellor Morvax spoke again. The Zytherian stated that these contributions were appreciated, but did not change the fundamental fact that humanity lacked the wisdom and restraint necessary for full Council membership. He suggested that humans should be grateful for being allowed to participate in galactic civilization at all, considering how recently they had achieved faster-than-light travel. The other Council members made sounds of agreement that ranged from chirps to rumbles to something like musical notes. Richard asked when humanity would be considered ready for membership if 15 years of loyal service and proven innovation were not enough. Morvax replied that the Council would revisit the question in another century, and that humans should use that time to mature as a species. A century meant that Richard would be dead, and so would everyone else in this chamber who remembered this conversation. It meant that another 4 or 5 generations of humans would grow up as second-class citizens in a galaxy their ancestors had helped protect and improve. Karen tapped her tablet and brought up the next item she had prepared, which was a formal protest against the restricted zones that prevented human exploration and colonization. Before she could signal Richard to raise this issue, Morvax announced that the council had one more matter to discuss regarding humanity. The chamber lighting shifted slightly, and Richard felt his diplomatic instincts scream a warning. The High Chancellor explained that recent security assessments had determined that human military forces needed proper oversight to ensure they did not pose a threat to galactic peace. Therefore, the Council was requiring that all human warships be placed under direct Galactic Council command while maintaining human crews. The ships would still defend human space, but their orders would come from Council military coordinators instead of Earth's admirals. This arrangement would continue until humanity achieved full membership status. Richard heard Karen's sharp intake of breath behind him. Benjamin dropped his tablet and it clattered against the floor with a sound that echoed through the massive chamber. The Council wanted humanity to surrender control of their only real leverage, while still denying them any voice in how that military power would be used. They wanted human soldiers to die for Council interests, without humans having any say in which battles were worth fighting. The ambassador from the Kralian Collective added that this was a reasonable request, since humanity had volunteered their military support anyway, and this would simply formalize existing arrangements. Several other council members voiced agreement, and Richard realized they had already decided this before the session even began. This entire meeting had been political theater designed to present humans with a choice that was not really a choice at all. Richard looked at Karen and then at Benjamin, and saw the same anger and betrayal in their eyes that burned in his own chest. He thought about the human colonies that depended on council trade routes and the scientific exchanges that had taught humanity so much, and the political capital that Earth had spent building these relationships over 15 years. Then he thought about his grandfather who had fought in Earth's unification wars, and who had told him that freedom meant nothing if you had to beg for it on your knees. The ambassador turned back to face the council and spoke 4 words that he had never imagined saying. He stated that humanity respectfully withdraws from these negotiations. The chamber went completely silent, and Richard could see confusion on the alien faces that surrounded him. Morvax asked him to clarify his statement, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. Richard explained in clear, simple terms that Earth would no longer seek Galactic Council membership under the current terms. Humanity would withdraw all personnel from joint projects and recall all military forces from Council operations. Human space would remain open to peaceful trade and diplomacy, but Earth would no longer participate in this Council's political structure. He thanked them for their time and turned to leave. High Chancellor Morvax actually laughed, and the sound came through the translators as something like grinding stones. He told Richard that humanity would return within weeks once they understood the economic consequences of isolation. Other council members joined in with their own versions of laughter or amusement. They clearly believed this was a negotiating tactic or an emotional outburst that would pass. Richard stopped at the chamber entrance and looked back at the council one final time. He spoke loudly enough for every translator to catch his words clearly. He said that the council mistakes patience for weakness, and that this error would cost them dearly. Then he walked out with Karen and Benjamin following close behind, and the sound of alien laughter chasing them down the corridor. The shuttle ride back to the human diplomatic ship passed in tense silence until they cleared Vega Prime's orbital space. Karen finally asked if Richard understood what he had just done and whether Earth would support this decision. Benjamin worried aloud about the scientific partnerships that would end, and the knowledge humanity might lose access to. Richard sat in the pilot's chair and watched the stars streak past and told them both that some things matter more than convenience or profit, or even knowledge. He activated the quantum communication link to Earth and requested an immediate secure connection with President Helen Curtis. While waiting for the encryption handshakes to complete, Richard composed the message in his head. He would tell the President that humanity had tried patience and had tried cooperation, and had tried proving themselves worthy by every metric the Council demanded. Now it was time to try something different. It was time to try dignity. President Helen Curtis stood at the podium, in the United Earth Assembly Chamber, with her hands gripping the edges of the sleek metal surface. Behind her sat representatives from every human colony and territory, spread across 20 star systems, and in front of her waited journalists from 100 different news services. She had spent the entire night reviewing Richard's report and consulting with her military advisors, and now she had to explain to humanity why they were about to take the biggest gamble in their history. She began speaking without any preamble, because the situation demanded clarity, not political decoration. She told the assembly that humanity was withdrawing completely from all Galactic Council operations effective immediately. Every human soldier and scientist and engineer working on joint projects would return home within 60 days. All collaborative research programs would cease and all shared military operations would end. Earth would stand alone and humanity would face whatever consequences came from that decision. The assembly chamber erupted in shouting and questions, but Helen raised her hand for silence. She explained that the Council had demanded humanity surrender control of their military, while denying them any voice in galactic governance. She stated that no free people could accept such terms and maintain their dignity. Some assembly members nodded in agreement, while others looked terrified at the economic implications. Helen understood both reactions because she felt them herself. Admiral Patrick Logan sat in his office aboard the orbital command station and stared at the deployment maps that covered 3 entire walls. He had 48 hours to begin the largest military repositioning in human history, and the logistics made his head hurt. Human forces were scattered across 30 different Council installations and mixed into combined fleet operations from here to the Outer Rim. Pulling them all back without creating security gaps or starting incidents would require perfect coordination. Opened a communication channel to all human ship commanders simultaneously and delivered orders in his characteristic blunt style. Every vessel was to begin withdrawal procedures according to Protocol 7, which meant polite but firm disengagement from joint operations. Any resistance from Council forces was to be met with calm professionalism and absolutely no violence unless directly attacked. Patrick knew that the Council expected humans to cause trouble during the withdrawal, and he refused to give them that satisfaction. Captain Jake Morris received his orders while the battleship EDS Valiant was docked at Kepler Station for routine maintenance. The station served as the primary hub for Council military coordination in this sector and housed over 50,000 personnel from 20 different species. Jake's assignment was to evacuate all human personnel, including civilians, who had been living and working there for years. He called his senior staff to the briefing room and began planning the extraction. Commander Lisa Grant managed the civilian evacuation effort and quickly realized the scope of the problem. The station housed 3,000 human civilians, including families with children and researchers in the middle of important projects. Many had established lives here and maintained friendships with alien colleagues, telling them they had 72 hours to pack. Their entire lives and leave was not going to be easy. She started with the research wing where Dr. Benjamin Cole had gone directly after returning from Vega Prime. Benjamin was coordinating with human scientists to secure their data and research materials before departure. What he discovered shocked him deeply. Over the past 5 years, human researchers had contributed to 63% of the breakthrough discoveries credited to Council science programs. The alien scientists had taken human innovations and presented them as collaborative efforts while giving humans minimal credit in official records. Benjamin downloaded every file he could access and copied research notes from human scientists who had been too trusting with their alien colleagues. He found designs for improved shield generators that a human engineer named Danny Pierce had developed, but which now appeared in Council databases under a Zytherian researcher's name. He discovered medical techniques that human doctors had pioneered being taught in alien universities, without any mention of their human origins. Danny Pierce himself was 3 levels down in the engineering section trying to extract human-designed components from critical station systems. What he found disturbed him even more than the stolen credit. Nearly every major system on the station had been modified or improved by human engineers over the years. The power distribution network used a design Danny had created 2 years ago. The life support redundancy protocols came from a human safety specialist. Even the docking computer algorithms had been rewritten by humans to improve efficiency. He reported this to Captain Morris, who immediately understood the implications. When humans left, they would not just be taking their people but also their knowledge and their ongoing maintenance work. The station would continue functioning, But problems would accumulate without human engineers quietly fixing issues before they became critical. Danny estimated the station had maybe 6 months before major failures started occurring. Jake authorized a complete evacuation of human personnel and equipment, but ordered everyone to leave the station systems intact. He would not sabotage council installations, but he also would not leave detailed maintenance documentation. If the council wanted to understand how their own station worked, they could figure it out themselves. The evacuation proceeded methodically over 60 hours. Lisa managed the civilian side with compassion and efficiency, while Jake coordinated the military withdrawal. Alien personnel watched the humans pack and leave with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. A Tyrellian scientist approached Benjamin and quietly asked why humans were abandoning their friends. Benjamin replied that they had not abandoned anyone, but they could no longer work without respect or recognition. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. On Proxima Station, Captain Rachel Moore oversaw the departure of the entire human research colony. She had commanded the station's human contingent for 4 years and had built genuine friendships with many alien residents. A group of younger species representatives approached her privately before departure and apologized for how the council had treated humanity. They admitted they lacked the political power to change council policies, but they respected humanity's decision to demand better treatment. Rachel thanked them and suggested they remember this moment when their own species sought greater representation. She boarded her transport ship and watched through the viewport as Proxima Station grew smaller in the distance. Beside her sat a xenobiologist named Claire Brooks, who had spent 7 years studying alien plant species in collaboration with researchers from 6 different worlds. Claire had tears in her eyes as she watched her laboratory disappear from view. The military withdrawal proved more complicated. Human ships had been integrated into Council defense fleets and joint patrol operations. Admiral Logan had to extract vessels from active combat zones without leaving allied species vulnerable to attack. He worked with sympathetic alien commanders to ensure smooth transitions, but some Council military leaders tried to block human departures. A Krelian admiral attempted to prevent 3 human destroyers from leaving a border patrol assignment by claiming they were needed for ongoing operations. The human squadron commander politely informed him that the ships were leaving regardless, and the Krelian could either accept a smooth transition or explain to his superiors why he had started a confrontation with departing allies. The Krelian backed down but filed a formal protest. Admiral Logan received dozens of similar reports as human forces disengaged from their positions. Most withdrawals proceeded peacefully, but a few Council commanders tried to use guilt or obligation to keep human ships in place. Patrick sent clear instructions to all human officers that they were to be professional and courteous, but absolutely firm. No human ship would remain under Council authority no matter what pressure was applied. Meanwhile on Earth, President Helen implemented emergency economic measures. She knew the Council would attempt sanctions or trade restrictions, so she ordered immediate expansion of human mining operations in previously restricted areas. Governor Amy Watson of New Columbia Colony received authorization to begin full exploitation of the rich mineral deposits in her system that Council regulations had previously limited. Amy threw herself into the work with determination that bordered on obsession. She coordinated with Operations Chief Victor Hayes, who managed the mining fleets. Victor had been arguing for years that humans should extract more resources from their own territory, instead of depending on Council trade. Now he finally had permission to prove his theories correct. He deployed mining ships to asteroid fields and established processing facilities on barren moons. Agricultural Director Sophie Blake faced a different challenge on the colony world of New Horizon. The planet imported 30% of its food from Council sources because local production had focused on luxury crops for export. Sophie had 60 days to convert those export farms to staple food production before the supply ships stopped coming. She worked 18-hour days coordinating with farmers and agricultural engineers to redesign entire growing operations. Back on Earth, Richard Hayes met with President Curtis and Admiral Logan to discuss the next phase. The withdrawal was proceeding smoothly, but Richard worried about what would happen after all human personnel returned home. The Council expected humanity to collapse economically without access to galactic trade routes. They expected desperate messages begging for readmission under any terms. Helen smiled grimly and told Richard that the council had made a critical miscalculation. They assumed humanity needed the council more than the council needed humanity. Over the next few months, they would discover how wrong that assumption was. She had already authorized quiet diplomatic contacts with non-council species who might be interested in alternative trade arrangements. Several younger civilizations had responded with enthusiasm. The final transport ships departed from council installations 6 days ahead of schedule. Jake Morris brought the Valiant home to Earth orbit and filed his after-action report. He noted that the withdrawal had cost 0 casualties and resulted in 0 violent incidents despite council predictions of human aggression. He also noted that at least 15 alien species had privately expressed sympathy for humanity's position, even if they could not support it publicly. Admiral Logan compiled reports from all sectors and presented the summary to President Curtis. Every human soldier and civilian had been successfully extracted from council space. All human ships had returned to Earth authority. The withdrawal was complete, and humanity now stood alone for the first time since making contact with galactic civilization. Helen read the report and felt a mixture of pride and fear. She had gambled humanity's future on the belief that they deserved respect and equal treatment. Now they would learn whether that gamble paid off, or whether she had just isolated Earth from the rest of the galaxy forever. She looked out at the stars through her office window and wondered what came next. 6 months had passed since humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council, and Earth had not collapsed into chaos as the Council predicted. Commander Greg Palmer stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed defense platform, orbiting the outer edge of human space, and watched construction drones assemble another weapons array. The platform used a radical honeycomb design that council engineers had dismissed as structurally unsound, but human simulations proved it could withstand 3 times more damage than conventional stations while using half the materials. Greg had overseen the construction of 12 such platforms in the past 4 months, and 8 more were in various stages of completion. Each platform could operate independently or link into a network that covered human territory with overlapping fields of fire. The design came from a young engineer who had been laughed out of a council symposium 2 years ago for suggesting such an inefficient approach. Turned out efficiency meant different things when you were defending your own home instead of someone else's empire. Down on New Columbia, Governor Amy Watson reviewed the quarterly production reports with satisfaction she tried hard to hide. Her colony had not just achieved food self-sufficiency, but had actually exceeded previous import levels by 17%. Operations Chief Victor Hayes had pushed his mining teams beyond what anyone thought possible, and the resource extraction numbers looked almost too good to be true. Amy made a note to personally thank Victor because his work had proven that council restrictions on human mining had been about control, not conservation. Agricultural Director Sophie Blake submitted her own report showing that the emergency crop conversion had succeeded beyond projections. The new food synthesis methods she developed were already being adopted by 3 other human colonies. Sophie had worked herself nearly to exhaustion, but seeing her people fed with food they grew themselves made every sleepless night worthwhile. She wondered if the council realized yet that their economic pressure tactics had failed completely. The Galactic Council was indeed beginning to realize something had gone wrong. High Chancellor Morvax sat in an emergency session called to address the deteriorating situation at the Krelian front. What had been a minor border dispute 6 months ago had exploded into a full-scale conflict that threatened to spill into council space. The Krelian collective had always been aggressive, but council forces had always managed to contain them through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic maneuvering. Without human tactical advisors, the containment had failed. Morvax reviewed the battle reports with growing concern. Council forces had suffered their first major defeat in over 3 centuries, and the Krelian advance showed no signs of stopping. The military coordinator explained that human officers had been quietly managing dozens of small conflicts across the galaxy and preventing them from escalating. No one had noticed because the humans never sought credit for this work. The Council had assumed their own strategic brilliance kept the peace, but it turned out a significant portion of that brilliance had human fingerprints all over it. Morvax felt anger at being deceived, but he knew the humans had not deceived anyone. Council members had simply never bothered to look closely at who was actually doing the work. They had been too busy congratulating themselves on their superior wisdom. Back in human space, Captain Jake Morris commanded the Valiant on a patrol route along the border of human territory. His sensors detected a Zetherian cruiser attempting to cross into human space without requesting permission. Jake opened a communication channel and politely informed the Zetherian captain that he was about to violate human sovereignty. The alien captain responded with obvious annoyance and stated that council vessels had free passage throughout the galaxy. Jake corrected him gently but firmly. Council vessels had free passage through council space, but this was human space and different rules applied. The Zetherian captain seemed genuinely shocked that humans would deny entry to a council ship. He argued that the scientific survey mission he commanded had operated in this region for years. Jake acknowledged this but explained that those operations had occurred with human permission that had since been revoked. The Zetherian threatened to file a diplomatic protest, and Jake invited him to do exactly that. He added that the Valiant would escort the survey ship back across the border, whether the captain cooperated or not. After several tense minutes, the Zetherian cruiser turned around and departed. Jake watched it go and felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. He had worked alongside Zetherian officers for years, and some had been competent professionals. Unfortunately, their government had made choices that created this situation. On Earth, Dr. Benjamin Cole led a research team that had just achieved a breakthrough in quantum slip drive technology. The new drive could cut travel time between star systems by 40% compared to current council standard drives. Benjamin stared at the test results and understood immediately that this represented a massive strategic advantage. Council scientists had been working on this problem for 300 years without success. He called a meeting with President Helen Curtis and Admiral Patrick Logan to discuss what to do with the discovery. Benjamin argued that scientific knowledge should be shared for the benefit of all species. Patrick countered that humanity needed every advantage it could get, while standing alone against the entire galactic community. Helen listened to both arguments and then made her decision. The quantum slip drive technology would remain classified for now. She explained that humanity had spent 15 years freely sharing their innovations with the Council and had received restrictions and condescension in return. Earth would not make that mistake again. Benjamin accepted the decision, though it clearly pained him to keep scientific advancements secret. Helen promised that when humanity rejoined the galactic community as equals, they would share this and other discoveries freely. Trade routes throughout Council space began experiencing problems. Relay stations that had operated smoothly for decades started showing maintenance issues. Ships reported navigation beacon failures and communication delays. The Council's infrastructure coordinator investigated and discovered that human engineers had been maintaining much of the galactic network for years. Small repairs and constant updates had kept ancient systems functioning long past their expected lifespans. Charlie Ross had managed these maintenance operations from a coordination center on Europa. His teams of human engineers had traveled constantly fixing problems before they became critical. The Council had paid for this service but had never appreciated its importance because the work remained invisible when done properly. Now that Charlie and his teams were gone, the accumulated neglect became obvious. Ambassador Richard Hayes watched reports from inside Council space with clinical interest. He maintained contact with several sympathetic alien diplomats who quietly fed him information. The Tyrellian ambassador sent word that younger species were beginning to openly question Council leadership. 3 species had formally protested humanity's treatment and demanded reforms to the membership process. This represented the first real political opposition the Council had faced in living memory. The Council attempted to open diplomatic channels with Earth multiple times. Each envoy ship that approached human space received the same response. Humanity no longer recognized Council authority and would only negotiate. T is equals, not supplicants. President Curtis personally rejected each delegation and reminded them that Earth had tried diplomacy for 15 years. The Council threatened economic sanctions, but human merchant fleets had already established independent trade agreements with 17 non-Council species. These alternative trade networks grew rapidly because human merchants offered better terms than Council-approved routes. Species that had chafed under Council economic restrictions jumped at the opportunity to trade directly with Earth. The Council discovered that their economic leverage was not as absolute as they believed. Younger species were willing to risk Council displeasure for the economic benefits humanity offered. A critical moment arrived when the Andromeda Outpost Research Station suffered a catastrophic cascade failure in its primary systems. The station housed 2,000 researchers from 12 different species, conducting long-term astronomical observations. Life support would fail within 8 hours, and evacuation ships from the nearest Council base would take 10 hours to arrive. The station commander sent distress calls in all directions, hoping someone closer could respond. Captain Nina Foster commanded the EDS Horizon on a patrol route that put her only 2 hours from Andromeda Outpost. She received the distress call and immediately calculated intercept courses. Her executive officer pointed out that responding would violate the policy of non-engagement with Council installations. Nina understood the political implications, but she also understood that 2,000 people were about to die if someone did not help them. She opened a channel to Admiral Logan and explained the situation. Patrick listened and then asked what she wanted to do. Nina stated that she had not joined the space service to let people die for political reasons. Patrick authorized the rescue mission, but warned her that this decision would have consequences far beyond saving lives. Nina acknowledged and ordered her crew to maximum speed toward the dying station. The Horizon arrived at Andromeda Outpost with 40 minutes of life support remaining. Nina's crew worked with desperate efficiency to evacuate researchers using every available shuttle and transport pod. They pulled people from compartments filling with toxic gas and carried injured researchers through corridors where gravity had failed. When the last survivor cleared the station, Nina watched it explode from a safe distance and felt grateful they had not been 30 minutes slower. The rescue made news across the galaxy within hours. Images of human crew members carrying alien researchers to safety played on every major network. Among the rescued were the daughter of High Chancellor Morvax and 2 high-ranking Council officials who had been visiting the station. The political implications were obvious and immediate. Nina had proven that humanity's withdrawal was about principles, not hatred. The situation at the Krelian front collapsed completely 3 weeks after Captain Nina Foster rescued the researchers from Andromeda Outpost. High Chancellor Morvax received reports that 6 Council defense positions had fallen in a single day, and refugee ships were flooding into Council space by the thousands. The Krelian military had broken through the containment line and showed no signs of slowing their advance. Species that had lived under Council protection for centuries suddenly faced invasion, and the Council military proved unable to stop it. Morvax called an emergency meeting of the military high command and demanded explanations. The senior admiral explained with obvious frustration that Council forces lacked coordination and strategic cohesion. Each species wanted to protect its own territory first and refused to commit forces to joint operations. The admiral admitted something that made Morvax's blood run cold. Human officers had been providing the strategic planning that held the joint military together, and no one had bothered to develop alternatives before the humans left. The Council had operated under the assumption that their superior technology and ancient wisdom made them naturally better at warfare than young species like humanity. This assumption was now costing them entire star systems. The Krelian collective used tactics that the Council had never encountered before, and without human tactical analysis, no one seemed able to develop effective countermeasures. Morvax asked why the Council's own strategic experts could not handle this problem, and the Admiral replied that most of their experts had been experts at taking credit for human work. Trade routes continued deteriorating across Council space. Merchant ships reported that relay stations were going offline faster than repair crews could fix them. The infrastructure that had supported galactic commerce for thousands of years was failing in slow motion. High Chancellor Morvax received a report from the chief engineer explaining that humans had been performing constant preventive maintenance on systems throughout Council space. Without that maintenance, every piece of equipment was approaching failure at roughly the same time. The engineer estimated they needed at least 5 years to train enough technicians to replace the human workforce, and another 3 years to actually perform all the deferred maintenance. Morvax asked if they could simply hire human engineers to return and fix everything. The chief engineer laughed bitterly and pointed out that humans had been willing to do exactly that work for fair compensation and basic respect. The council had provided compensation, but forgotten the respect part. Charlie Ross received multiple job offers from council contractors desperate to get human maintenance teams back to work. He rejected every offer and forwarded them to President Helen Curtis with notes about how much the asking prices had increased. Some offers included payment rates 10 times higher than what the council had paid before. Helen smiled when she read the messages and filed them away without responding. The council needed to understand that humans were not motivated purely by money. Back on Earth, Ambassador Richard Hayes met with diplomatic representatives from younger species who had begun secretly approaching humanity. The Tyrellian ambassador arrived first and spoke carefully about how his government admired humanity's courage. He could not offer public support because his species depended on council trade, but he wanted Richard to know that attitudes were changing. 5 other species sent similar messages through carefully concealed channels. Richard listened to these quiet overtures and understood their significance. The younger species were testing the waters and calculating whether opposing the council was politically possible. Every day that humanity survived and prospered made that calculation easier. Richard sent carefully worded responses encouraging these species to pursue their own interests rather than blindly following council dictates. He stopped short of asking them to form an alliance because desperate requests would undermine humanity's position. 3 younger species took a bolder step. They announced formal protests against humanity's treatment and demanded that the council reform its membership policies. The protests came from species that had only recently gained council membership themselves and remembered their own struggles for recognition. High Chancellor Morvax tried to dismiss these protests as misguided idealism, but other council members expressed concern. Political dissent was spreading and the council faced opposition for the first time in over a millennium. The council dispatched envoy ships to Earth requesting formal negotiations. President Helen Curtis rejected the first 3 envoys without even reading their credentials. She sent a simple message stating that Earth would negotiate only when the council demonstrated genuine willingness to treat humanity as equals. The council threatened economic sanctions, and Helen responded by releasing data about the alternative trade networks human merchants had established. 17 non-council species now traded directly with Earth, and 6 of them had begun using human-designed relay stations instead of council infrastructure. Admiral Patrick Logan received intelligence reports showing increased military activity near human space. Several council species were positioning warships along the border in what they claimed were routine patrol patterns. Patrick did not believe these were routine movements and ordered additional defense platforms activated ahead of schedule. He sent a message to all human fleet commanders reminding them that their mission was defense, not provocation. If the council wanted a military confrontation, humanity would not give them an excuse to claim humans started it. Captain Jake Morris and the Valiant encountered one of these council patrol groups near the border. A squadron of 5 Zytherian warships took up positions just outside human space and began conducting what their commander called training exercises. Jake watched their movements carefully and noted they were practicing assault formations designed for orbital bombardment. He recorded everything and transmitted the data back to Fleet Command while maintaining a respectful distance. The Zytherian squadron commander eventually opened a communication channel and suggested that humans should reconsider their isolation before the council lost patience. Jake replied that humanity had not isolated itself, but rather the council had refused to accept humans as equals. The Zytherian officer seemed genuinely puzzled by this distinction and asked what more humans wanted beyond the generous accommodation the council had already provided. Jake explained slowly that humans wanted the same rights and respect granted to every other spacefaring species, and nothing less would be acceptable. The conversation ended there, but Jake suspected it represented the fundamental disconnect between human and council thinking. The elder races truly believed they were being generous by allowing humanity to exist in their galaxy. They could not comprehend that humans considered themselves inherently equal to any other intelligent species, regardless of age or technological development. This philosophical gap might prove impossible to bridge. Dr. Benjamin Cole and his research team achieved another breakthrough in material science that improved shield efficiency by 30%. Benjamin brought the results to President Curtis and Admiral Logan, expecting another discussion about keeping the technology classified. Instead, Helen asked if this discovery could be implemented quickly enough to matter if the Council decided to attack. Patrick confirmed that his engineers could retrofit the fleet within 2 months. Helen made her decision quickly. She authorized immediate implementation and continued classification. Benjamin accepted without argument this time because the military buildup near human space made the strategic situation obvious. He returned to his laboratory and began working with military engineers to turn theoretical improvements into practical defensive systems. Science for its own sake would have to wait until humanity's survival was secure. The Tyrellian ambassador sent an urgent message to Richard through encrypted channels. He warned that hardline council members were pushing for military action against humanity. They argued that allowing humans to successfully defy council authority would encourage other species to do the same. The moderates were losing political ground as the crisis at the Krelian front worsened, and infrastructure failures multiplied. The ambassador estimated humanity had perhaps 2 months before the council attempted something drastic. Richard forwarded this intelligence to President Curtis along with his own analysis. He believed the council was moving toward either a military confrontation or a complete reversal of their position. Either outcome would come soon because the council could not afford to let the current situation continue. Every day that passed made humanity look stronger and the council look weaker. Helen read the report and ordered all human colonies to review their evacuation procedures while trying not to let the preparations appear panicked. Then the critical incident occurred. A council supply convoy bound for refugee camps near the Krelian front suffered a navigation computer failure in the middle of a journey. The ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in an empty region of space with no clear way to restart their systems. They carried food and medicine for 50,000 refugees, and their emergency supplies would last perhaps 3 days. The convoy commander sent distress calls knowing that no council ships were close enough to help. Human listening posts detected the distress signal. The nearest human vessel was a supply ship commanded by Lieutenant Kevin Walsh, making a routine run to the mining colonies. Kevin was not a combat officer, and his ship carried no weapons beyond basic defensive systems. He calculated that he could reach the stranded convoy in 8 hours if he pushed his engines past recommended limits. His executive officer reminded him that helping council ships contradicted current policy. Kevin thought about Captain Foster's rescue at Andromeda Outpost and the message it had sent. He thought about 50,000 refugees who would starve because of political disputes they had nothing to do with. He opened a channel to Admiral Logan and explained the situation. Patrick listened and then asked the same question he had asked Nina. Kevin stated that he had not joined the fleet to let innocent people suffer. Patrick authorized the rescue and Kevin pushed his engines to maximum. The human supply ship reached the council convoy with hours to spare. Kevin's engineering team repaired the navigation computers and provided supplies to replace what the council ships had consumed during the crisis. The convoy commander thanked Kevin with obvious embarrassment and asked why humans kept helping council operations after everything that had happened. Kevin replied simply that the dispute was with the council leadership, not with the people those leaders were supposed to protect. High Chancellor Morvax learned about the second human rescue within hours. His daughter had been among those saved at Andromeda Outpost, and now humans had rescued another 50,000 council citizens. The political implications were devastating to the hardline position. Council propaganda had portrayed humans as resentful and dangerous, but human actions told a different story. Younger species were openly asking why the council treated such reliable allies so poorly. Morvax called a private meeting with his closest advisors and asked for honest assessments of the situation. What he heard shocked him. The council had been coasting on past achievements for over 1,000 years, while younger species drove actual progress. Humanity's withdrawal had exposed how dependent the council had become on others doing the real work. The Emperor truly wore no clothes, and everyone could now see it clearly. The High Chancellor spent a sleepless night reviewing records and accepting truths he had ignored. The council needed humanity more than humanity needed the council. Their military was fractured without human coordination. Their infrastructure was failing without human maintenance. Their political unity was cracking without a common purpose. Meanwhile, humanity was building its own trade. networks and making technological breakthroughs and demonstrating the moral character the Council claimed to possess. Morvax made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. He composed a personal message to President Helen Curtis requesting a private meeting to discuss the future of human-council relations. He did not demand or expect but requested. He suggested the meeting occur on Earth rather than Vega Prime because humanity deserved that recognition. Then he waited for a response and hoped he had not waited too long. President Helen Curtis read High Chancellor Morvax's message 3 times before responding. She sat in her office overlooking the lights of Geneva and considered what this moment meant for humanity. The leader of the Galactic Council was asking permission to visit Earth, and that simple fact represented a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had existed for 15 years. She called Admiral Patrick Logan and Ambassador Richard Hayes to her office to discuss the response. Patrick argued for caution because the Council had positioned military forces near human space, and this meeting request could be a distraction. Richard countered that Morvax had made genuine concessions in his message by requesting rather than demanding, and by offering to come to Earth. Helen listened to both perspectives and made her decision. She would accept the meeting, but on strict human terms. Morvax could bring a small delegation, and they would meet in Geneva with human security controlling every aspect of the visit. The meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later, which gave both sides time to prepare. High Chancellor Morvax arrived aboard a small diplomatic vessel with only 5 advisors. His ship landed at the spaceport outside Geneva, and human security teams escorted the delegation into the city. Morvax looked around at the human architecture and the crowds of people going about their daily lives. He had never visited Earth before, and seemed surprised by how ordinary and peaceful everything appeared. The meeting took place in a conference room with windows overlooking Lake Geneva. President Curtis sat at the head of the table with Richard on her right and Admiral Logan on her left. Dr. Benjamin Cole and Captain Nina Foster were also present, representing the scientific and military communities. Morvax sat across from Helen with his advisors arranged behind him. The Zetherian looked uncomfortable sitting at a table, designed for human proportions, but he made no complaints. Helen opened the meeting by thanking Morvax for making the journey to Earth. She stated that humanity appreciated the gesture and understood its significance. Morvax acknowledged the thanks and then began speaking in a way that surprised everyone present. He admitted that the Galactic Council had made a grave error in its treatment of humanity. He stated clearly that the Council had been wrong to deny humans equal status and wrong to demand control of human military forces while refusing political representation. The High Chancellor explained that the past months had forced the Council to confront uncomfortable truths. The elder races had grown complacent and arrogant over millennia of unchallenged dominance. They had stopped innovating and started coasting on achievements their ancestors made thousands of years ago. Younger species like humanity had been driving actual progress, but the Council had taken credit while providing only condescension. In return, Morvax looked directly at Helen and said something that clearly cost him enormous pride. He stated that the Council needed humanity more than humanity needed the Council. Without human tactical coordination, the military was fractured and losing ground to the Krelian advance. Without human maintenance, the infrastructure was failing across Council space. Without human innovation, the elder races were stagnating. The Council had mistaken humanity's patience and cooperation for weakness and dependence. Richard listened to this admission with carefully controlled emotions. He had spent 15 years arguing these exact points and being dismissed as naive or presumptuous. Hearing the High Chancellor of the Galactic Council acknowledge these truths felt surreal. He glanced at Helen and saw that she was measuring Morvax carefully, trying to determine if this admission came from genuine understanding or political desperation. Helen asked Morvax what changes the Council was prepared to make. The High Chancellor laid out a proposal that his advisors had obviously spent considerable time developing. The Council would grant humanity full membership with complete voting rights. All restrictions on human exploration and colonization would be removed. All technology sharing agreements would be renegotiated on equal terms. Human sovereignty would be formally recognized with no exceptions or conditions. Admiral Logan asked about the military situation and whether the Council expected human forces to immediately Help with the Krelian crisis. Morvax surprised him by saying no. The High Chancellor stated that the Council had no right to expect human military support after everything that had happened. If humanity chose to assist, that would be appreciated, but it would be humanity's decision made for humanity's reasons. The elder races needed to learn to solve their own problems instead of depending on others. Dr. Benjamin Cole raised a question about scientific collaboration. He asked whether the Council would provide proper credit and recognition for human contributions to joint research. One of Morvax's advisors responded by presenting a detailed accounting of human innovations that had been misattributed or undervalued over the past 15 years. The advisor stated that the Council would issue formal corrections and ensure that human researchers received appropriate recognition going forward, Captain. Nina spoke up and asked about the younger species that had supported humanity during the withdrawal. She wanted to know if the Council would retaliate against species that had traded with Earth or voiced criticism of Council policies. Morvax assured her that no retaliation would occur. In fact, the Council was implementing broader reforms to give younger species greater representation in Council decisions. The current crisis had exposed flaws in the governance system that needed correction. Helen listened to all of this and recognized that the Council was offering everything humanity had asked for and more. The terms were generous and addressed every major grievance. However, she also understood that trust could not be rebuilt instantly. The Council had spent 15 years treating humans as useful primitives, and 6 months ago had demanded humanity surrender military control while denying basic rights. One apology and a list of reforms did not erase that history. She told Morvax that humanity would consider the Council's proposal, but several conditions had to be met first. The Council must issue a formal public apology acknowledging its mistreatment of humanity. All member species must vote to approve humanity's full membership with no opposition. The Council must restructure its governance to provide proportional representation for younger species. These reforms must be implemented and proven functional before humanity would rejoin Council operations. Morvax agreed to these conditions without argument. He asked how long humanity would need to review the proposal and make a final decision. Helen stated that Earth would provide an answer within 30 days. The High Chancellor accepted this timeline and prepared to leave. Before departing, he approached Richard and spoke quietly. He thanked the ambassador for having the courage to walk away from the negotiating table 6 months ago. That action had shocked the Council out of its complacency and forced changes that should have happened centuries earlier. Richard replied that humanity had not wanted confrontation but sometimes standing up for principles required accepting conflict. He expressed hope that the Council would prove through actions that its words today were sincere. Morvax assured him that the elder races had learned a painful but necessary lesson. He left Earth knowing that humanity held the stronger position, and that reality represented a fundamental shift in galactic power dynamics. Over the following weeks, the Galactic Council moved with unprecedented speed to implement reforms. The formal apology was issued in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. Every Council member species voted to approve humanity's full membership. The governance restructuring began with younger species gaining significant representation in Council decisions. The changes were real and substantial enough that even skeptics like Admiral Logan admitted the Council seemed genuinely committed to reform. President Curtis called a meeting of the United Earth Assembly to vote on whether humanity would accept the Council's terms and rejoin galactic society. The debate lasted 3 days with passionate arguments on both sides. Some representatives argued that humanity should maintain independence and avoid re-entangling with the Council. Others insisted that humanity had made its point and could now engage as equals while reaping the benefits of galactic cooperation. Helen cast the deciding vote in favor of accepting the Council's terms. She explained that humanity had never wanted isolation, but rather respect. The Council had now provided that respect and met every condition humanity demanded. Refusing to rejoin at this point would be petty and counterproductive. Earth would engage with the galaxy as an equal partner pursuing mutual benefit, not dominance. The Assembly voted to accept, and humanity's return to galactic society became official. Formal readmission ceremony took place on Vega, Prime but under very different circumstances than previous Council meetings. Ambassador Richard Hayes arrived not as a petitioner seeking favor, but as the representative of a full member species. High Chancellor Morvax personally welcomed him, and acknowledged that the council chamber looked forward to hearing human perspectives on all matters going forward. The assembled species applauded, and Richard noticed that the younger species applauded loudest. Military coordination with the Krelian front resumed gradually. Admiral Logan negotiated careful terms, ensuring human officers had genuine authority, not just advisory positions. Captain Jake Morris and the Valiant joined a joint task force, and within weeks the tactical situation began improving. Human strategic analysis combined with council resources created an effective response that stabilized the front and began pushing back the Krelian advance. Dr. Benjamin Cole returned to collaborative research projects with new protections, ensuring proper credit and recognition. He presented the quantum slip drive breakthrough at a scientific symposium and received a standing ovation from researchers of multiple species. Several alien scientists approached him privately to apologize for taking human innovations for granted. Benjamin graciously accepted their apologies and suggested they focus on future collaboration rather than past mistakes. Trade networks expanded rapidly as council and human merchant systems integrated. The alternative routes that human merchants had developed proved so efficient that many became permanent additions to galactic commerce. Charlie Ross found himself coordinating a hybrid infrastructure that combined council experience with human innovation. He hired engineers from multiple species and built maintenance teams that worked better than either system had managed alone. Captain Nina Foster received a commendation from both Earth and the Galactic Council for her rescue of Andromeda outpost personnel. During the ceremony, High Chancellor Morvax thanked her personally and introduced her to his daughter, who had been among those saved. The young Zetherian expressed gratitude and stated that Nina's actions had helped her father understand that humanity's character exceeded its years. Life across human space gradually returned to something resembling normal, except that normal now meant something different. Human colonies maintained the self-sufficiency they had built during the withdrawal. Governor Amy Watson kept the expanded mining and agricultural programs running because independence remained valuable even within the larger galactic community. The experience of standing alone had taught humanity that it could survive anything, and that confidence showed in everything humans did. 1 year after humanity's withdrawal from the peace talks, Ambassador Richard Hayes stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed human embassy on Vega Prime. He watched ships from dozens of species arriving and departing and reflected on how much had changed. Earth had gambled everything on the belief that dignity mattered more than convenience, and that gamble had paid off beyond anything he imagined. Captain Jake Morris and Commander Lisa Grant shared a drink in the officers' lounge aboard the Valiant as it patrolled the border between human and council space. Lisa observed that the entire galaxy had transformed over the past year. Jake agreed, but noted that the most important change was that humans were no longer supplicants, begging for acceptance. Earth had left the negotiating table as petitioners and returned as partners. The galaxy had not given humanity respect, but humanity had taken it. The stars continued turning and the galaxy continued evolving. Humans spread across new worlds with council blessing, and alien species visited Earth as honored guests. The elder races learned to share power, and the younger species learned that courage and principle could overcome ancient hierarchies. History would record this period as the moment galactic civilization matured from a stagnant empire into a true community of equals.